And hello again from WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. I'm Josh Manning, Deputy Managing Editor for Assignment at the Western Journal. Joining me today, one of our features, well, we've got two of our features writers, expert in-house writers. On my left is Brett Kershaw, named after the fantastic knife company that I love. I have a Kershaw in my pocket, and I have one next to me. It's very nice.
It may or may not be factual.
May or may not be factual. And on my right, Eric Nanneman. I was talking with Kayla, the producer, ahead of the show, and was talking with these guys, and I think kind of the unofficial theme for this show is unspeakable truths, or ineffable truths that we know are out there, but we're either not supposed to say, or when they are said, the establishment wants to censor them out of existence. And the best example of that, the establishment trying to censor an unspeakable truth out of existence, is the story Brett has got. This goes back to COVID. It goes back to COVID cures, and it goes back to potential. Ultimately, if what Brett says is right, YouTube really could be contributing vastly to misinformation, potentially costing lives as far as COVID goes. Brett, tell us about the research you've been doing.
So it's important to start that this is YouTube, but it's Google's YouTube. So this goes farther up than just the
tech titans, the big guys.
Titans, the tycoons, yes. And Google happens to be the most prolific Google or search engine in the world. So they happen to hold a lot of power over the internet. So going back to 2020, about a year into the pandemic, doctors, physicians around the world had been searching for alternative methods that happened to either provide treatment or prevent COVID-19. One of the drugs, we were exposed to some. Hydrochloroquine was one. In addition, we're going to utter the dirty words. Ivermectin is the other one.
Ivermectin.
Zinc as well, if
Sean.
I believe.
Yes. Yeah, zinc was
Another one.
So all of these physicians and doctors came up with treatments, routines, and some of them found success, some of them didn't. None of them, certain drugs found the national highlight and found attention within the national media or former President Donald Trump.
Chloroquine being the biggest one.
Yeah. Ivermectin was not one of these. So getting to the juicy details, there is a physician named Dr. Pierre Corey, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce his name, but on December 8th, I believe, he testified in front of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security. In that meeting, he educated, or at least he didn't educate, but he shared with the senators some findings about a drug which was having a lot of success in preventing, in addition to treating COVID. One of the main findings of their report, and I don't want to go through all of them, and in addition to that, I don't want to do disservice to his findings and his research. But the one that stuck out to me was in Argentina. They had given 800 frontline physicians ivermectin, to which none contracted COVID.
So these are medical people who are on the front lines of the COVID pandemic. They're going to get exposed.
They're going to get exposed. Yes, they have PPE on, the masks, in the first trying months as well of the pandemic. And of 800 people that had been given the drug, none had contracted it. And then on the other side of things, there was 400 which had not been given ivermectin. And I don't want to get the statistic wrong, but roughly there's a group which did contract COVID and a group which didn't. So there's
How
obviously
large was the group that did contract?
I think it's a majority. It's a majority. Out of the 400, I believe it's in the 270s. And I'm fairly confident in saying
so that. Over half, but none of the ivermectin.
None out of 800. Out of 800
came down with symptoms. Okay.
So this testimony, which occurred in the U.S. Senate, was taken off and removed from YouTube. That testimony by that physician, in addition to another summary, and Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin, he has spoken in front of certain groups or voters, and described ivermectin. He's mentioned ivermectin. We should at least investigate this drug.
Yeah.
He's not saying that
Yeah.
we should use this drug. He's just saying there needs to be a conversation about this drug.
Well, and that
He's
was
also
Trump.
been removed.
That was
Exactly.
Trump. Hey, let's look at it.
Yeah, discussion. Maybe.
And they turned that into Trump
Yeah.
saying, "Oh, inject bleach into your veins."
And I'll get into the fact check in a minute, which is even more ludicrous.
Sorry, I'm jumping the gun. I'm excited.
So essentially, a U.S. senator has also, in addition to testimony within the U.S. Senate, a U.S. senator's videos have been removed from YouTube. And then lastly, just to show that this isn't some sort of like conservative, like we're getting picked on type of thing, Brett Weinstein and his wife, Heather Hying, they have a Dark Horse podcast, which they debut on YouTube. I don't describe them as conservatives. I would describe them as progressives.
They're absolutely, but reasonable.
Very reasonable people.
Reasonable.
And through the months, they have been documenting aspects of the pandemic, treatments, if the lockdowns, a variety of issues in relation to the pandemic. And they have talked extensively about ivermectin, and they have included other physicians in this discussion. And one of YouTube's stipulations is that if you have a discussion with other physicians, we may waive our misinformation policies. So even despite meeting this stipulation of saying we're going to have other guests on, we're going to talk about the heterodox and the orthodox treatments, they get banned. So Brett Weinstein's podcast, every episode that he's mentioned ivermectin has also been banned. So
watch while you can, folks. If you're watching on YouTube, this may vanish down the memory hole.
Exactly. Perfect. And so we, at the moment, and this is a very critical point, when you follow the money, you tend to find some either nefarious things, insidious things, or insidious actors. One of the key takeaways I have found in my research is that ivermectin, which was found and discovered in the 1970s, is considered a wonder drug, and it's put into the same company as penicillin and aspirin. That's good company. That's like Michael Jordan and LeBron James of medicine. And for YouTube to and Google and the World Health Organization, the National Institutes of Health, all to say that conversation even about this is not allowed. And these people aren't going out and selling ivermectin. They're not benefiting from this.
Yeah, it's a generic drug, as I recall.
Yes, it's a generic drug. There's no patent for it. It's
So there's
widely
no
produced.
money. So follow the money. What you're saying is there's no money to be made.
Yes. So why is why are we getting censored? Why anybody that even dares to mention these forbidden words and have a conversation about, well, maybe an efficacious treatment? What's the point of this? What's the point of this? And
I have 12.4 billion reasons why this has been censored, right? Operation Warp Speed, I think Time Magazine quoted about $12.4 billion was spent from the entire program. That's a lot of money. Now, whether Google and its parent company Alphabet, I can't foresee a grand conspiracy, but what I can see is pressure, right? Pressure from the administration, saying like we want to, or people who are stockholders within Google saying, we also have holdings in these other companies. Personally, I got into Novavax when it was put into Operation Warp Speed, and I'm very happy for my returns. But that's why I love being a conservative. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? And not just be a victim. But it's troubling, right? Because again, Google is not the public square. Right, they owe nobody nothing about as far as free speech is concerned. But you have to ask the question why. If I'm merely talking about a medication, talking about a drug, as you say, it's generic. It's in the same realm as aspirin. If I talked about taking vitamin C, for example, would I be censored, or would my videos be pulled off the air? That is troubling. So you would have to look at the stockholders, right? The major stockholders who own Alphabet, the parent company of Google. What else do they own? And kind of follow the money that way.
It occurs to me that Trump did, I think, a good job of bringing the private enterprise system to bear against COVID. I mean, he marshaled everything that free enterprise could throw at it.
Yep.
And the people who he had at the White House, the people who were counseling him, the people who were trying to create the innovation needed to fight it, these were all people who had, not all, a large number of these people had a significant monetary stake in this. And it's hard to imagine inviting the CEOs of big drug companies to the White House to consult with the president, and all of those CEOs saying, hey, Mr. President, there's this drug that they use for heartworms in dogs. It's really cheap. It's readily available. Nobody owns a patent on it anymore, so we can all just pump out generics. You know, 12.4 billion sounds great, but let's just we'll take one on the chin for the American people, and we'll just go with ivermectin. It is very hard for me to picture a CEO of a Fortune 500 company saying that. Am I being naive?
Absolutely not. What is the primary role of a CEO? To be in business.
Yes.
And be in business is making money. Their boss is not the American people. Their boss is the shareholders. And every quarter they got to trot out results, right?
Yeah.
And if they are just pumping out this drug for free while the rest of the economy is closed down, and they're going to have huge decrease in sales, of course that's their stock price. Their stock price is going to go down. Their own bonuses will go down and so forth. So of course they're motivated by pure profit. Obviously.
And what's interesting is you mentioned that they're not the public square. And that's very true. Like, we shouldn't go to them and expect them to just give us unfeathered free speech.
Absolutely.
That's not their job. Nonetheless, it is our job as enlightened people to look at this corporation and say, well,
But why?
why? You guys, what you're doing right now may
Yes.
be proliferating the plight, the death of this emergency. And it's so odd to me that when things like this are happening and the victims of this censorship don't share ideological brotherhood with one another. They're very
Yeah, it's
different.
an equal opportunity.
Exactly.
COVID's an equal opportunity.
Exactly. And these
assailant.
people are truly, actually, like, when I listen to their podcast, they're inquisitive. They're really trying to strike at the why. Like, we're merely scientists here. We're just asking questions. We're engaging in the scientific method. Why are you guys censoring us from participating in science? Something that has been, over the past year and a half, put on a pedestal as like,
Exactly.
don't question the science. And they're engaging in the process
The elite,
of scientific.
yes, the elite. How many times have we heard, trust the science, trust the scientists, trust the expert? It's just absolutely ridiculous. You don't put a scientist in charge of society. That's what has happened with Anthony Fauci. They put somebody in charge who was supposed to advise elected officials as far as how to act, but you're not supposed to put the expert in charge. You're supposed to have someone to temper his perspective. But it is really weird optics wise, and we've got to move on from this, but it's really weird optics wise. You're right. What direct benefit could there be to Google from squelching this? I don't know the answer to that, but that's the problem with it, is that there is no easily explicable answer. So it lends this kind of behavior on YouTube's, Google's, Alphabet's part. All it does is open the company up to unbelievable conspiracy theories about what they're actually up to. And, I heard somebody say the other day, the difference between a theory and a conspiracy theory is 6 months. And Wuhan was a little bit longer than that. That was a conspiracy theory, but a year, maybe a couple months past that, we're seeing, hey, turns out it wasn't a conspiracy theory after all. Go ahead.
What happened 6 months prior to this date?
Oh,
roughly.
What?
January 6th.
January 6th. Yes. So
Good segue.
great segue. So, unutterable truths. You can't talk about ivermectin. This show may get taken down. Another thing you can't talk about January 6th, unless you were talking about how it was white supremacists who were trying to take over the country. They had plotted a coup. They were trying to overthrow the duly elected government of the United States of America and impose some sort of a Ku Klux Klanocracy. If you say that, you can get all the attention you want. If you try telling a different narrative, watch out. You might get crushed for doing that. But our good friend over at Fox News, Tucker Carlson, the intrepid Tucker Carlson, the frequently bow-tied Tucker Carlson, had an absolutely fantastic segment last night. Now, he went just a hair farther than I would go with the claims he made, but not much farther than I would go. Tucker looked at a piece from Revolver News. If you don't know Revolver News, I want you to spend as much time at the Western Journal as possible, but you can check out Revolver News too. Tucker's a big fan, says that they've done some of the best reporting on this. I don't know that for a fact. I haven't spent a lot of time there, but they did a fantastic in-depth set of reporting on what has happened with indictments since January 6th. And what Revolver found out was that there were a significant number of people who were involved in the insurrection, the protest, the riot, whatever you want to call it, the incursion, whatever you want to call it. There were a significant number of people involved in that, and not only just involved, who were organizers of it, who have so far been unindicted. And in fact, many of them have not yet been identified. And what Revolver found was absolutely striking. We've got about a 2-minute clip from Tucker that sets this up. I want to roll that, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit, and then we've got another clip to further substantiate. Let's roll that first clip of Tucker.
An answer to some of these questions. We know that the government is hiding the identity of many law enforcement officers who were present at the Capitol on January 6th, not just the one who killed Ashley Babbitt. According to the government's own court filings, those law enforcement officers participated in the riot, sometimes in violent ways. We know that because, without fail, the government has thrown the book at most people who were present in the Capitol on January 6th. There was a nationwide dragnet to find them, and many of them are still in solitary confinement tonight. But strangely, some of the key people who participated on January 6th have not been charged. Look at the document. The government calls those people unindicted co-conspirators. What does that mean? Well, it means that in potentially every single case, they were FBI operatives. Really, in the Capitol on January 6th. For example, one of those unindicted co-conspirators is someone government documents identify only as Person 2. According to those documents, Person 2 stayed in the same hotel room as a man called Thomas Caldwell, an insurrectionist, a man alleged to be a member of the group the Oath Keepers. Person 2 also, quote, stormed the barricades at the Capitol on January 6th alongside Thomas Caldwell. The government's indictments further indicate that Caldwell, who, by the way, is a 65-year-old man, this dangerous insurrectionist, was led to believe there would be a, quote, quick reaction force also participating on January 6th. That quick reaction force, Caldwell was told, would be led by someone called Person 3, who had a hotel room and an accomplice with him.
So Person 3, unidentified. Person 3 also, Tucker didn't get into this, but it's in the Revolver piece and the supporting documents that Revolver has. Person 3 also claimed to have a heavy weapons cache and was going to be on hand in case things got dicey to ferry. He was going to use a boat, and he was going to ferry the heavy weapons out there to the people who were insurrecting, who were rioting, who were doing whatever it was they were doing.
Via the Potomac?
I would say, I suppose so. So, Josh, you might say, I don't know about that. Really? They're all FBI people? I don't know either. But we've got another clip from Tucker that I want to run here in a second that I think is going to get you, if you're feeling skeptical now, may bring you on board. But first off, I want to talk to you guys about this. Brett, we'll start with you. Why in the world, if they know who person number 3 is, because they differentiated him from person number 2 and person number 15 and person number 20. So if they've got somebody, they know the identity. He had heavy weapons. He was going to bring heavy weapons to this thing. Yes. One of the damning, most confounding things that has happened to the left's narrative on this is, turns out none of these people were armed with guns.
Yes.
There were a couple people with bear spray, and then, of course, flagpoles. Flagpoles were weapons, according to the media on this. So the guy was going to bring heavy weapons in, yet he's not been indicted. He's not been identified. Why? Why in the world?
Oh, well, it's even more interesting, compounding what you just said, with the fact that on Twitter, Facebook, the government has launched a nationwide catch this person endeavor, in addition to doing a perp walk with every single person that was even just outside.
Anywhere near.
That man, the man with the Washington football team cap, there's no idea, like the framing, like this guy is the bad guy. So for them to come to me and say, well, we have some unnamed, unknowable folks here. That's total. Am I stupid? Do you think I'm that dumb or do you think I'm that stupid? Like, which one is this?
That's how I feel. And look, I get it. It's one thing if person 3 made a random phone call for one of the people they've identified. Okay, don't identify. No big deal here. Heavy weapons, Eric.
Yes.
Heavy weapons.
Flagpoles and all.
Flagpoles and all. So when you talk about heavy weapons, I mean, I would presume these were going to be things like belt-fed suppression weapons, rocket launchers, that sort of thing.
100-round belts, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's what we're talking about this guy providing, yet he's not identified and the guy hasn't been indicted. Seriously, what do you make of that? What, just as the reasonable and responsibly skeptical journalist that you are, what do you make of that?
The interesting thing that I find is that especially when we see the bipartisan Senate report from last week, the examination of the U.S. Capitol attack, which clearly showed that the U.S. Capitol Police were aware that the insurrection was happening. And then you have these individuals that, as he so finally said, we have 484 people who have been publicly charged, and then unknown quantities kind of kept quiet. Why is that? The government can't wait to splash people's names on faces on
those
television.
Perks.
Exactly.
Walk those perks.
But these people aren't. So now I'm not saying this is true. This is all speculation. This is all us taking a few facts and joining them together. But you can see the possibility that, and it would make sense from my perspective, right? The FBI would want people on the ground to kind of do what they could if it got bad. But then, maybe they got a little too, overzealous, in their activities and so forth. And now they're trying to reel them back in. It's interesting. The U.S. Capitol Police knew it was going to happen. They obviously, if they knew it was going to happen, they would probably put people on the ground, but not a word has been heard about that.
Not a word. Yes. So, Josh, you're saying you still haven't established that they were on the FBI's payroll. Well, let me and Tucker tell you another story that may bring this into perspective. Do you remember the kidnapping plot that had to do with Michigan's unbelievably failed, incompetent governor, Gretchen Whitmer? Do you remember that? Well, turns out the FBI was involved in some of that plotting. Tucker, take it away.
That's a line, and the FBI has crossed it. And it's not the first time they crossed that line in Michigan. Remember that plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer? We heard a lot about that, and Whitmer was able to cover some of her own incompetence, though not all, by pointing to the fact that she's now a victim. Now, in the FBI's telling of that plot, a whole team of insurrectionists was going to drive a van up to Gretchen Whitmer's vacation house and throw her in the back and drive away. The mastermind of this plot, according to the FBI, was a man called Adam Fox. Who is Adam Fox? Adam Fox turned out to be a homeless guy who was living in the basement of a vacuum repair shop. Quite a gorilla. The whole story was a farce. It was insulting, really, once you got to the details, which outlets like the AP didn't bother with in the first read. But if you read the government's charging documents carefully, and you should, you will see that it gets even more ridiculous. It turns out that one of the 5 people in the planned Gretchen Whitmer kidnap van was an FBI agent in the van. Another was an FBI informant. And the feds admitted in these documents that an informant or undercover agent was, quote, usually present in the group's meetings. In other words, using simple math, which we can do even on cable news, nearly half the gang of kidnappers were working for the FBI. Remember the guy who suggested using a bomb to blow up a bridge as part of that plot? That got a lot of coverage. That guy was an undercover FBI agent. Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. So, is it still that big a mystery? The FBI was literally employing people involved in the plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer. And the point guy on it, who the FBI was so eager to get, was a homeless guy living in the basement of a vacuum repair shop. I don't know when the last time you looked at a vacuum repair shop was, but they're really depressing, the ones I've been in. This guy probably didn't have the wherewithal to kidnap the governor of Michigan. But apparently the FBI went in and said, hey, we can give you a helping hand with that. That is unbelievable. Now, the last piece, and we've got to move on quickly. I want quick responses from you guys, but the last piece of this, the agent who oversaw the operation that planted those guys in the kidnap van, those FBI agents in the kidnap van, he took over in D.C. right before the Capitol riots. He took over right beforehand. So the guy knows this game. He knows the game where you insert the FBI guys. It looks like they help push it along. Hey, let's plant a bomb. It's the FBI's idea. Good gosh almighty. And so then he takes over in D.C. We know that the authorities in D.C. knew this was coming ahead of time. They did nothing to stop it. And now they refuse to identify the people who were helping organize the event. 15-second take on it.
I am an anti-statist libertarian.
And this is why.
So when you just laid that out in front of me, hairs stick up on my body, I get goosebumps. Why? These things don't happen. The state doesn't do things just because it feels like doing things. The state always has interests at play. My 15 seconds are about up. Reading history, this seems pernicious.
Fair enough. Eric, wrap us up on it.
Not a modern day Moriarty then, huh? In the basement. Look, from my perspective, at some point we have to have a level of trust in law enforcement. And when they do actions like this, it erodes the trust of the American people, and that's no good.
Bingo. And all that does is play into the narratives that the establishment media claims to hate. All it does is do that. All right, so truths that can't be uttered. We've talked about ivermectin. We've talked about January 6th. Now, those are sort of outside threats to America. I want to shift gears with Eric's, and I want to talk about a very internal, very personal threat to America. Take it away, Eric.
Thank you. This past month, myself and Samantha Kamen have done a special report, several reports on the American family. And the American family interacts with the culture. And as anybody living in America in 2021 realizes that the culture is quite toxic, that the American family is under attack by many different sources. I mean, pornography, the media, same-sex attraction, lax drug laws. I mean, you name it. And I had a chance to speak with the director of marriage and the family here with the Roman Catholic Church here in Phoenix, the Diocese of Phoenix, Stephen Phelan. And we had a great conversation about what is our role as Americans to defend the family. And because we can't really legislate that, right? I mean, that's really kind of a non-starter. But what we can do is educate ourselves and our own families and help those families that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. But the one thing that I found so interesting in talking with him is that he used an analogy. He said, imagine the culture, our society, is a body, a human body, flesh, bone, and all that. And imagine that the individual cells that make up the body, they could be one of two things. They could be a person, so every single person in America is an individual cell, or each cell could be the family, where each of the cells is an individual family. Again, why don't you tell me a little bit, if you could imagine the family being the cell versus the individual being the cell, what would be the difference, do you think, in society?
Well, I think that we would be, I sort of go back to I think the premise of what you're talking about is at that point, family is core, which probably means children are core, which probably means the protection of children from corrosive influences is one of the most important things in society. And that is an unbelievable, that is a marked difference from what's happening today when kids turn on the MTV Music Awards and they see essentially strippers up there.
Exactly.
When the lyrics to, I remember my son was 9 or 10 and his phone started playing a song by Eminem. And I was like, caught you. And I was I looked up the lyrics. I was so angry about it. I kid you not. I crushed his phone in my hand. Wow. I was so angry that this garbage was being delivered into my kid's mind and poisoning his emotions and his thoughts and his spirit. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be the huge difference. You're not focused on individual adult. I think primarily you'd be focused on trying to make sure the next generation takes over okay.
Yeah, and the thing, you're absolutely right.
I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely right, in my opinion. If the individual is the cell, then every single person's opinion is valid as anybody else's, right? Any crazy idea, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, is as valid as anybody else. And so we see that. We see the LGBTQI, enforcement today.
Mafia.
Thank you. We see some of the race theory we come into schools. We see Pride Month now, and we see children being indoctrinated. And we, as Neuro-Americans, as you said, feel that we can't speak our minds or call out like, no, this is not right. This is not right. And if the family is the nucleus, if the family is the cell, then as you said, the children should be protected, because another disconnect that our society has is that it disconnects the primary end of marriage. Now, there is a unitive aspect of marriage, but the primary end of marriage is to have children. Now, that's not a very popular opinion in America, but what that is popular, it's popular for the 4,000 years of Judeo-Christian civilization. Western civilization has always promoted the marriage as a primary means for having children. It wasn't until the 1960s with the birth control pill that you would have this separation in human sexuality, where there was a procreative unit and there was a unitive unit. And what the pill did, and contraception like that, was separated it, bifurcated it. So now the Americans view sexuality as just recreation. And procreation is there on the side. Like if you want at some point to have children, well, then go ahead and indulge in that. But really, it's there for, recreation. And that has decimated the family. Because it reduces the sexual act to just recreation instead of what it's meant for. That's the sacred act of procreation.
Any thoughts, Brett?
So there's maybe some area.
Because this should be a good discussion.
Yeah, there may be some areas of disagreement here. But first, I'd like to focus on places where I think me and you will both point blame. In the halls of Congress, in the offices of the New York Times, by teachers in public schools. I think those are places where children go or adults may go, and those values which you just voiced, those I would say they're pernicious. Those things which do directly look to devalue the family, because the family as a unit is I can't argue against that. I mean, just the empirical evidence indicating if you don't have a good structure of a family, your life doesn't. Your life may, if you face unneeded obstacles, if you don't have a father,
massive, statistically massive ones, not
Yes.
just unneeded, but enormous obstacles.
Yes, big holes. And I mean, one of the ones that I like to focus on is I have a sister, and I think having a sister gives males a very good role model, a female role model who you can't find sexual. So you're like, I respect this woman. I think that installs very good values.
And vice versa.
Exactly. So where I find the family under attack is the corporate state, the media, like you mentioned, like the degradation of the inclusion of same-sex marriage. Well, we will disagree on those things. I tend to live and let live, and if you don't value the family, I value the family, and I will interact with those people who also value the family. And this is the other thing which I think you stated, which I wholeheartedly agree. What you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong. This must happen on a communal level. Like you mentioned, this cannot happen through legislation. We can't mold our image of what is right into the populace. We need to teach people these things. That is powerful, and that's what lasts. Is the motive of education, enlightenment, and if just
keep going,
I'm
please.
sorry. And honestly, the idea that if your local community, if your neighborhood, if your neighbors are those who also share those same values, like you look, my kids are going over to the Smiths, and I know that their family values these similar values that I do. It builds a better community. When one family values family and they have families around them that values family, that whole community is a family, if that makes sense.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely.
And to me, that's what I'm looking for. Is I want to live within a place that installs the same values that I voluntarily subscribe.
You're just super quickly, your point that it can't be legislated, I think is so true. And that's one of the reasons why, even if you were an atheist or an agnostic or even an anti-theist, that's one of the reasons why you should value the faith. Because even if there's ultimately nothing behind it, it does create family stability, which we know is good for society. And that's one of the things that the guys who were beginning to realize, oh boy, we opened Pandora's box with the Enlightenment. Turns out a lot of good stuff that goes with the Enlightenment, but once you get rid of faith, oh, God help you.
Yeah.
When Nietzsche said God is dead, he wasn't celebrating, oh, God's dead, anything goes. He was saying, okay, if God's dead, then we got some real problems coming our way. And it turns out an enormous number of those problems were realized in the 60s when we found a way to circumvent what a lot of people would call the natural order of things.
Right, right. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers take issue with the fact that, as a Catholic, I'm against the birth control pill, against contraception, and I'm sure many of our viewers would disagree with me on that, and that's totally fine. But what I would say, and what I would point out and would challenge people, is that the primary end of sex is children. And when you, as you said, separate that out, what are you doing to the family? Because when sexuality goes bad, you get older or what have you, you're having sex less often, then what's the basis of the marriage? Well, if the basis is just recreation, what happens to your marriage?
Well, you can find a lot better recreation
Yeah.
out on a beach at spring break.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is this great statistic. I saw this this chart, and it started from 1960 to 1970, and it showed the rise of the birth control pill. And in 1960, less than 0.5% of people used the birth control pill because it was just released. By 1970, it was 45%. They then put the divorce rate underneath it, and it was lockstep, the exact same.
Oh yeah, yeah. The need, the incentive. Well, yeah, and the incentive for marriage drops too. One of the main incentives for marriage for the male is a consistent sexual partner. One of the main incentives for female is that when the result of that sex happens, when she becomes pregnant and has a child, she's got an extra layer of security and can.
That's right.
Is afforded the career time, non-vocational time to raise the child. But if you eliminate the kid from that, there's not a whole lot of reason to stick together.
That's exactly right.
And that's hugely problematic. And where the place where the Roman Catholics and Protestants can get together on this is the realization that, okay, we may differ on birth control itself, but we agree that sex belongs inside of marriage. And once you take it outside of that, once it either exists outside the covenant of marriage or exists outside the vows of marriage, enormous problems begin to develop. And if you want to talk about problems like that, look at a 70% illegitimacy rate in the black community in America and what it has done to black men, to black boys who grew up to be men and have been imprisoned since then. Jim Dobson years ago made the observation that Dr. James Dobson made the observation that it turns out kids actually get their moral compass from their father. While the mom nurtures them and provides those special linkages, they get their moral compass from their dad. And if the dad isn't there, then the moral compass doesn't it's not to say it doesn't function or it doesn't exist, but it doesn't get the calibration it was supposed to get that whole time. And when you have testosterone flooding into boys' heads as they're hitting puberty and trying to figure out whether they're men or not, and you don't have men in place to show them how to channel that and to show them how to be men who know when to exercise force at the right time, but also know when not to. Without that, very dangerous things begin happening, and we have seen that. We have seen that increase since the 60s. That's great. Do you want a quick last word?
Well, I was going to say as you mentioned that there's plenty of non-Christians in marriages, but I want to say out to the Christians. This final quote from Dr. Phelan was that the family that prays together stays together, and I think that's spot on.
That's good.
May I say
Yeah.
one thing? It would. What is great about this specific conversation is we are being, and this is the wrong word, please correct me right away. We're being selfless because what we're really trying to advocate for is the ultimate, the next generation's life in preserving.
Yeah, society. We are trying to keep
yes.
the West going.
This isn't about us. This isn't about what we want. This isn't about what, as parents, we want for our kids. This is about the children, and we have evidence to indicate that this lifestyle is the most suitable.
The only agenda we have is we want happy, joyous family.
Exactly. We want to
children.
This
That's
isn't
our only agenda.
Exactly. And it's so important.
And the data on that is so freaking clear. When you live in essentially in compliance with a biblical worldview, that doesn't mean you're going to be healthy, wealthy, and wise, but it does mean the odds of you being healthy and at least self-sufficient and satisfied with life are far, far higher. All right, we've gone super long. Sorry, folks. It was a good discussion. If you stuck with us through the whole thing, excellent, because this may be the only time you get to see it. YouTube may take this down. As we were saying, the ivermectin talk may be enough to actually nuke this video. So maybe check back tomorrow and see if we're still up. And whether or not we're up tomorrow, we will certainly be back Friday at 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific, with another episode of WJ Live. As always, be sure to check us out on the web. Go over to westernjournal.com. We've got the stories we've been talking about are over there, or they're being worked on right now for publication over there. It is it is the premier, the biggest Christian conservative publisher of news and commentary. And we are working tirelessly to try to save the West and to hopefully to spark revival. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to click the subscribe button. After you click subscribe, a little bell's going to come up. Click on that bell, and you'll get notified when we go live. Hopefully, they'll still do that after this episode. We will see. Anyway, until Friday, until then, and for Brett, for Eric, for Kayla and Logan and all the other folks here, and on behalf of the Western Journal, I'm Josh Manning. We'll see you Friday.